Greetings, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm so glad to be with you all this morning. I am the Reverend Amy Johnson, and I am the Minister for Sexuality, Education, and Justice in the United Church of Christ. With me this morning are some familiar and new faces. Over to you, Melanie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. I won't be talking too much today because, as you can hear, my voice is kind of fading out. I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Dr. Tanya Bass, a dear friend of mine and a colleague. Tanya is the founder of the North Carolina Sexual Health Conference, and which you'll learn more about in a little bit. Tanya has a master's degree and a PhD in human sexuality education from Widener University, as well as a master's degree in health promotion. She is the lead human sexuality instructor at the North Carolina Central University. She has a certified sexuality educator with the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And she's also a certified health education specialist. She has more certifications than we can imagine. She is the co-author of Nani Talks About Race, which is a wonderful book for children and part of the Noni series. And with me, she is the co-author of a chapter in the upcoming book, The Professional's Guide to Sexuality Consultation, for which Tanya and I surveyed sex educators who were in private practice. And I will leave it to Tanya to add anything that I may have forgotten. Welcome, Tanya.
Good morning, well, afternoon or morning, depending on, I guess, where folks are tuning in from. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat a little bit today about the importance of continuing education. And I can just jump right in if you all want. I was thinking about...
I think Amy had an opening reading.
Amy had an opening? I'm ready.
Yeah, okay, go. Yeah, let me just...
Listen, I had breakfast, so I'm ready.
You're good, okay. So just a couple things we want to just encourage you all. Thank you for putting in the chat where you're coming from and are tuning in from today. That's great. And if you have questions during the program, we really encourage you not to use the chat, but to use the Q&A feature. That will really help us be able to monitor and make sure your questions get answered. It's just too much for us to try to follow along the chat while we're leading the webinar. So if you can do that, please help us out that way. I read something recently about 2023. It was, just a meme on social media that was like, okay, we're all going to go really quietly into 2023. Don't touch anything. And I kind of feel like that's sort of the kind of feeling that we all maybe have a little trepidation of having been like, okay, well, that year's done and now we're on to this year, and then having the year implode on us again. So hopefully we appreciate that you are starting your year off with us and with this webinar. And I have an opening reading for us that you may have heard before. It is a poem by Jeanette Encenius called Beneath the Sweater and the Skin. How many years of beauty do I have left? She asks me. How many more do you want? Here's 34. Here's 50. When you're 80 years old and your beauty rises in ways your cells cannot even imagine now, and your wild bones grow luminous and ripe, having carried the weight of a passionate life. When your hair is aflame with winter, and you have decades of learning and leaving and loving sewn into the corners of your eyes, and your children come home to find their own history in your face. When you know what it feels like to fail ferociously and have gained the capacity to rise and rise and rise again. When you can make your tea on a quiet and ridiculously lonely afternoon and still have a song in your heart, queen owl wings beating beneath the cotton of your sweater. Because your beauty began there, beneath the sweater and the skin. Remember? This is when I will take you into my arms and coo, you brave and glorious thing, you've come so far. I see you. Your beauty is breathtaking. So happy New Year. And now, without further ado, go, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Amy. I was just ready to jump in because I was thinking as Melanie was introducing me and was mentioning like certifications and of course some of the schooling that I've had through my academic pursuits. Um, that's how I came into this place. Like, so as Melanie was mentioning, I finished my PhD at Widener University, and my topic really focused on professional development, or what we would call continuing education. And, you know, depending on the discipline that you're in, we might hear those terms used interchangeably. And some people categorize them as different because, like, I think you can participate in professional development, but you might not get continuing education credits. So therefore, that sometimes makes it a little bit different. But overall, when I think about my career trajectory, especially as I'm sitting here now, how I came to this place is I've had a lot of different jobs. And we were actually just offline talking about people moving from jobs and finding their places in the world. And for me, my job trajectory was never really about my purpose and what I wanted to do. I knew as a public health educator that I wanted to do public health education specifically. I knew once I learned about specific aspects of public health as it relates to prevention that I wanted to do sexuality related public health education. What I didn't know is that there was a whole, you know, my background, my undergrad is health education with a focus on community health. So that's why I was so drawn to the prevention side of health education and public health. But as I started to grow and develop, I learned more. Like, I stayed away from school health and general education like nobody's business, because I was like, that's just not who I am. I knew I needed some of those techniques and some of those practices, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be. But I realized I still was doing it anyway, but just in a different form. Like, I might not have talked about pedagogy, but I actually was doing, and practicing and utilizing pedagogy. So anyway, long story short, as I was moving in that career path, working at a local health department, working as a disease intervention specialist. And for those of you who don't know, DIS, or disease intervention specialist, probably if you're familiar with how we did COVID contact tracing, that's kind of the idea around disease intervention specialists who've been around for centuries, where we go out and we educate and test people, sometimes in their homes, at their jobs, for HIV and syphilis, specifically in North Carolina. And I knew that was the job I wanted. Like, coming out of undergrad, I was like, that's the job, I gotta have it. And I started working at the American Sexual Health Association. Pre-Google, people actually used to pick up the phone and call a hotline. And
imagine that, calling and talking to an actual person.
And there was such a thing as a phone book that actually had the listing of the hotline. And it was a national hotline right here in Durham, North Carolina. And we would get calls from all over the nation asking questions about STD symptoms. Where could folks get tested? How are they transmitted? And so it just felt right and the right thing to do. But as I started working with persons living with HIV and AIDS, I started doing more about the whole person, like what it means to disclose, what it means to be a sexual being with a chronic illness or an infection that could transmit to someone else, and what that looks like, and how to understand your wholeness in being a sexual being. And I built a curriculum around that for peer educators to support one another. And I realized that the way I was trained wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was very narrow. And even some things that I probably said to people, I wasn't practicing myself, just keeping it real. But as I did that, I was like, I want to learn more and do more. And so my career just kept moving me into different paths into human sexuality and sexuality education. But in that time, through those different positions, I would go to different trainings, some required. Like I've worked, I have no biological children at all. I probably have kept infants or toddlers no more than a weekend. So they're not necessarily safe with me, but I had to take, parenting classes. It was a training called Partners for a Healthy Baby. Some of you might be familiar with that, or Parents as Teachers, because I was coordinating these programs. And the more I looked at it, the more I kept seeing how there were gaps in what people were talking about as it related to sexuality. If I went to an HIV prevention conference or a pregnancy, and why couldn't it, I don't even know why it was all called pregnancy prevention. It wasn't even called sexuality. And just seeing the gaps of like who wasn't there, who should have been there, or finding out things that should have been talked at this conference and maybe at another conference. And so overall, I found myself wanting to always learn and participate in continuing education. And then it also sparked me, as we mentioned, NC SexCon, to create my own conference to try to fill that gap in North Carolina.
And can I just say, it is a wonderful conference. I know not everybody has access to North Carolina, but if you can get there, it is a fabulous, energetic conference with lots of workshops on topics that are of value to anybody who's doing sexuality education, including our facilitators.
Absolutely. And the piece behind that is like the work that I was doing in going through the professional development or the conferences and the trainings. Some things aren't accessible to everybody, not only based on cost and geographic location, but discipline, right? And I want to NC SexCon, I'm working in the community with the Durham Housing Authority on a sexual health program for African American women. Well, why wouldn't I have my community members come to the conference too? They can choose the workshops that they want. Listen, they had a blast. Let me just tell you, the sex toys were a hit, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it just led to like us like loosening up and having more conversations around that. But all the glory, all the fun, all the learning, all the ideas, and I'm now moving into my doctoral studies at Widener University. There was one thing that stood out to me that bothered me a lot. So originally, I'll just be honest, I started my research study on like the benefits of professional development. That's where I really wanted to go, because I'm like, I go to these conferences, I know that I come back, I apply things. I mean, if you give me something, I was going to test it with my class or in the community like soon after. And that kind of goes with the principles of adult learning, especially. And so I didn't always see colleagues doing that, or people would come from the conference and say, well, that was good. Or they'll have their swag and they'll be like, oh, that was nice. And that was it. So I wanted to really do the benefits of professional development, which maybe one day I will. But I think Melanie and a few other people was like, but do you want to graduate? Do you want to finish your program? Do you want? And I was like, yeah, because I thought if I did that, I was going to have to like, I wanted to survey everyone, everywhere about their professional development opportunities and experiences, whether it was a conference or a training. Like I had it all figured out, but also it wasn't realistic. So to bring it down, I actually started looking at, so again, in my personal experience with folks here in North Carolina, was that I've trained teachers on evidence-based curricula. So in North Carolina, we have what is called reproductive health and safety education in grades 7 through 12. We also have community-based programming that provides education to middle and high school students. And then I myself teach on a college campus. So we have college sex ed and the community sex ed. But with that, specifically with some of the K-12 educators, I would always like, I'm pouring, if you all, most of you on here have done trainings, and it takes a lot out of you. Like you're giving your all and you want people to learn and get what they came for. And then how does it feel to have someone come up and say, well, I'm not going to teach this anyway because I just came to coach basketball. So I'll call Amy when I need to talk about sex in my health and PE class. And you're like, okay. So there were some folks who didn't feel comfortable. There were some folks who didn't feel capable, and just some folks who they didn't have a desire at all, but that was their role.
And sometimes too, there's people who think they already know it all, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, why do I need to come to this training? I teach, especially when I was thinking about the health and physical education. But then on the flip side, we have these folks who are doing evidence-based interventions, and some of those interventions, well, majority of the interventions that we have out now that are required in North Carolina were created in the 80s to the early 90s. They also were specific to HIV prevention programs. So it wasn't supposed to be sexuality education. And in North Carolina, just like I'm using North Carolina, but trust me, it's applicable most places, depending on your organization. They'll hire someone who is a good trainer, a good facilitator, someone who's literate, literally, because ultimately, if you look at these EBIs, most of them are semi-scripted or give you the information that you need, but they never ask you what you know and your knowledge, nor do they provide oftentimes additional content. So if you get a question from a student or a participant, you're capable and comfortable of answering it. So that's how
I think that's a really good point, because when I would like people who are listening this to understand the importance of this is not that we want you to go to a conference and, say, oh, this is a great thing, we're gonna teach this in our OWL class, but rather that it enhances your own knowledge and your own skill set so that you can use the curriculum more effectively. And as Dr. Bass said, you can answer questions more readily. So there's application to OWL facilitators, even though you're not necessarily going to create a new HIV workshop or something.
Right. And so when I think about this, to your point, is like, we have to do some self-reflection, right? And so in educator spaces, like straight education, not sexuality education, you'll see and hear the term of teacher disposition, right? Or educator disposition. And that's basically the idea around your own professional attitudes, values, and beliefs. It's how you show up in the classroom, your confidence level to some degree, your comfort and desire to actually teach a topic. And it shows up in your verbal and your nonverbal behaviors, including your comfort in your audience you're even teaching, right? And so it's how you interact with your colleagues, it's how you interact with the families, and how you interact with the students in your class. That same idea is for us, even though we're not we're sexuality educators, we're still educators, we're still teachers, we're still facilitators. So we have that, but then we have what we call I just want to bring it up, our overall professional disposition as it relates to who we are as a professional. So like, here's what we do, our content area, our discipline, but then who are we as professionals? Are we someone who wants to be the best of the best, right? Do you want to ensure that you're exhausting all efforts in your growth and development to be the best of the best? I don't like to think about it in a competitive world in space, because I think, not to get churchy, but I know it's loud here, iron sharpens iron kind of sense of like, we are able to learn. Like, I can have a conversation with Melanie or Amy about a topic that I might even know a lot about, but talking to them expands a level of my worldview, my knowledge. I see somebody put, comfort is not competence, nor is it confidence. Yes, because that's where I came to in my studies and how I got here. So I looked at the comfort and capability of sexuality educators in North Carolina using an assessment that was created by the Future of Sex Education, a group of collaborators who kind of pull together some questions that help you think about areas that you should be confident in, that you should be comfortable in, but that you also might need additional training in. So to your point, when we think about professional disposition or dispositional humility, now we all know what humility is, and humility can be challenging, right? Because it kind of is that thing of like, you can have pride and a high self-esteem, but you have to balance that, right? Like, so humility is, oh, go ahead, Amy.
I was just gonna say, it's like the right sizing of something. It's like not thinking too highly of yourself or too lowly of yourself. And that's what I think, right,
Yes.
about humility. Because I think a lot of people, it has a reputation of being like, oh, I'm just, to be self-deprecating, but that's really not what it is. It's about knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, right? And being open to learning. And I think that especially as you're talking, I'm thinking about, a lot of people who facilitate our whole lives are volunteers, right? And they've taken this training, and for a lot of people, it's transformational, particularly in faith communities, to be able to even talk about sex and to be able to talk about it in a religious or spiritual context. And a lot of times, our people are volunteers, so they may not be going, to a lot of conferences and things, but that doesn't mean there aren't other ways to learn and to be aware of, like you're talking about, to find out and to know that if you took your training 5 years ago or 10 years ago, like there's stuff that's changed. It's important to keep up with what's going on so you can be that leader and answer those questions.
And that's why we started these webinars, monthly webinars, as continuing education.
And I to your point, like if I think about like even when I had a master's already when I started my doctoral program at Widener, and I remember I had to take a theory class, and the majority of the content there was like a lot of health education theory, and I was like, honey, I know this stuff, and then I was like, hold up. And I didn't realize until I started working on the paper that I too came to this crisis of belief, sort of like crossroads with myself. I had to check myself, and I'm like, you know what? You do know a couple of theories and you've applied them in different ways, but you also have room to grow and learn. And I had to I literally told myself to chill out and calm down and don't believe my own hype, around what I knew about health education. And also, you got to remember what I said earlier. I was also trained and educated in a very specific way as it related to prevention education. And so I had to be open to seeing this work in a different way. And so coming into the research, I wanted to know what other people thought about their own comfort. Like, let's keep it real. Like, honestly, are you comfortable talking about um anal sex, or are you comfortable talking about same gender loving relationships? Are you comfortable talking about racism and how patriarchy and all those things impact the way we provide sex education and the people that are receiving the sex education? Like, what's going on in their
I
lives?
just have to pop in and say amen,
Yeah.
and then you can keep going. Go ahead.
But no, and these are the tough things. And also in North Carolina, this is appropriate, inappropriate, but I want to say it because this is the lens in which I approach this work. So in order to graduate, I had to pare it down to North Carolina. But we jokingly back in the day used to call ourselves the no ham state, although we were like the #2 pork distributor. So it's kind of a pig pun. But we didn't talk about homosexuality, we didn't talk about abortion, and we didn't talk about masturbation in any of the content that we provided in our K-12 settings for sex education. And none of those EBIs that I mentioned to you before, evidence-based interventions. So if you're familiar with making proud choices, reducing the risk, they talk some about it, but not a whole lot either. So there's content that students should be able to freely discuss in context and in an appropriate way in their school settings, but not everybody's well versed on that or comfortable or think of it as being legal, even though it's part of the curriculum.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Tanya, because we get a lot of people who ask us about OWL and evidence-based stuff, and the thing is, it's and we've been down the road, and we've it costs money, lots and lots and lots of money to do evidence-based long-term. We've had things that we've started that haven't been able to be followed through with for a variety of reasons. But the thing that I want to say about what you were just saying is, what evidence, right? Like, what is it that's being measured? And you've mentioned this a few times, like when you talk about prevention, like a lot of times what's being measured in the evidence-based programs is how many people get pregnant, right? And how many STIs. And there's so much more. There's so much more to sexuality education. And for, especially in our whole lives, one of the things is just the comfort level you're talking about being able to discuss these things in church.
Yes.
Right? Like that is majorly life-changing and transforming for people. And what we have for that is not data and charts as much as narrative evidence. We
Yes.
have that narrative evidence all the time with stories that people are telling us about how impactful the program was. So I just want to, I'm not saying that you shouldn't care about evidence-based stuff. And I know that that's a lot of times where funding is,
Yeah,
right?
a
That's where
lot of
funding is,
times.
right? But also to know that it's not everything.
Yeah. And
Well,
I think,
I would add that New Jersey had a fabulous, or has a fabulous state approved curriculum. It's a comprehensive curriculum, really, really good. And unfortunately, though, it's not individual school districts decide whether they're going to use it. And due to pressure from extremists, there's one school district in New Jersey that is now they're proposing, it hasn't been passed, but they're proposing that this, instead of this fabulous, long, full curriculum, that sex ed be offered the last half of the last day of the school year. So that parents can just pick their kids up at noon if they don't want their kids to get sex ed. And I'm thinking, but they're not getting sex ed if they're there for that half day anyway. That's not sex ed. What are they going to teach in, what is that, 2.5 hours at the end of the day? So we are in a position where our OWL facilitators are going to play an increasingly important role. And we can't rest on our laurels and say, well, we're supplementing, that biology stuff. You can't skip that workshop, because we can no longer assume that young people are getting even the basics in their school districts.
Right. And I thought it was rough for us because, you have to get it before 12th grade. Like, so you have to have the course before you graduate. But again, it's a course and it's embedded in health and physical education.
We have in Washington State, we passed, that's why I said I'm Washington State, and we passed a couple years ago a bill called R90, which mandates comprehensive sexuality education, K through 12 in the public schools. But I have had a conversation with some of the legislators about how that is still not being implemented because it's an unfunded mandate. And so some school districts are just saying, nope. So what do you do about that? Like, what do you do about that? So,
right.
Yeah.
So that points back to the importance of Tanya's research and work in terms of looking at, helping facilitators and educators continue to stay on top of their own learning, because there are going to be more and more gaps.
Right. Well, I think when I was looking back at the chat, and it's because it hasn't moved. The comfort is not competence, nor is it confidence. I wanted to go back to say too that the idea around professional or dispositional humility was derived from some researchers who were looking at the competence of doctors. And so, just like us, but in a different way, we all go through our learning. We all are trained. We all are prepared to do X thing. And we oftentimes, I think in society, there may be some medical doctors up here, bless you all, but we all kind of look at that, even with PhDs, like that is a lot of school. Who wants to do that? But you also think if you've done that, you should know everything. You should know a lot. And what also happens is that people expect that of doctors, medical providers, teachers, because if you're teaching this thing, you should know all of the things about it. But that's not necessarily, even if you do, are you in a place where you're confidently able to do your job, to teach that? And are you comfortable in doing it, going back to those high school teachers? And so when I think about where we are, like Washington State, North Carolina, New Jersey, 3 different, very distinct places where our sex education, the way we implement it, the way we provide it, are so different, but also consistently being challenged, at least in North Carolina, like cutting it down to the bare minimum, similar to what you're offering in New Jersey. It's kind of frightening. So we need people to be able to even articulate what they're teaching. That's part of the other part of your professional development.
Yeah, and I think to your point that, the comfort part and the confidence part, when we train people to be L facilitators, one of the things that we talk about is being unshockable. And it's not that internally we might get a question in the question box that makes us go, really? But we don't want the participants in our program to see that. We want to be able to then go back and do whatever research we have to do so that we can comfortably answer the question, because we don't want anyone to feel like there's something wrong with asking those questions.
Yeah.
So I think that magic combination of having the skill set, not only the OWL training, but other information that you pick up through these webinars or through conferences that people go to or blogs that people read, that all builds your confidence so that, let's say that you spend a week preparing an answer to that question and you can comfortably ask it, and then somebody asks the follow-up question that you're not necessarily prepared for, but knowing that you have enough information behind you, you can usually formulate a good answer, or a good answer, even a good answer that says, that's a great follow-up question. And I'm going to answer that next week because I'm going to do more learning. But that humility that you speak of, that accepting that we don't necessarily have all the answers at our disposal, but we need to keep learning, and we need to keep looking things up. I think that's so important.
I do too. I would even dare say, when you think about your confidence, so like I was trying to find this quote, but I'm going to still ask this question so I know that people can actually utilize the chat. So if I were to ask folks who are in attendance here, do you, and you could do a Y for yes and an N for no, M maybe for maybe, and IDK, I don't know, do you consider yourself a sexuality educator? So let's take a moment. Oh, can I see those? Okay, yeah. So I have some yeses coming in. So that in and of itself, I do not know. Okay, fair. Maybe. Gets maybes. And the thing is, a lot of times that connects back to, so like in part of my work and around doing this research, but just also what I was doing for myself as a entrepreneur, so to speak, like, and also kind of like branding the idea of like being proud to be a sexuality educator. I started making t-shirts. Now you can find a bunch of them, but it was only a few out there in the beginning.
I should have worn mine. I'm so sorry.
I probably should have too. But the first one I designed was a sexuality educator, and I was very specific in the definition of it being a professional who've like could study it and been trained to teach human sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember selling these, and I remember some people in North Carolina. Now I'm at a conference that's specifically for folks who are doing sex education, especially with adolescents. And although I know there probably could be some challenges in your neighborhoods if you did wear one of my shirts, because you're probably going to get some questions. So outside of the avoidance of social stigma, but also in relation to social stigma, because that means that's something you have to deal with too. But many of the folks were like, I'm not a sex educator. And what I realized, and that's what made my research so specific, specifically giving good results for the folks who were doing the work here, is that we had a group of folks who were doing like parenting and secondary pregnancy prevention. And so most of their work, like they were hired to be kind of a case manager or group facilitator to provide support groups for parents. But they're also doing education because they wanted folks to have the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to make decisions around their sexual behaviors so that they wouldn't experience a second unwanted pregnancy. And in my dissertation, I remember someone quoted, and I'm looking for it, so I'm gonna, oh, here it is. It said, not until this survey did I really consider myself a sexuality educator. I talk about sex as part of my work, but I do it And I still encourage my students to reach out to other better qualified professionals. So that said a lot of things to me, like probably like three. I specifically marketed my survey to folks who did very specific things, which for me define them as a sexuality educator. And you hear that this person said, it wasn't until this survey I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing. And then there was this idea around, I do it as part of my work. So it may not even be that they want to do it, but they could be that they have to do it because it's their job. And then so I think there was this balance of like confidence, but also ensuring they can make appropriate referrals. When they say, I still encourage my students to reach out to better qualified professionals. Now, I didn't measure their idea of like how qualified they thought they were, but it just says a lot around what they think about themselves in even doing this work. What are y'all thoughts about that? And even what you put in the chat, like some of you are yes and no.
So you're inviting people to answer in the chat.
Oh, yes. And you all too. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the thing about this work is that there are, in the current climate, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts as there's so many of them like spinning around. What you're saying is so rich, Tanya. That, you know, in the current climate, especially, certain entities have been successful in terms of really disrupting any kind of like federal consistency in terms of sexuality education. So it's so dependent on even like I was saying, even here where we have legislation, right? We have some legislation. It still is dependent on what school district you're in, what school you're in that school district, and what teacher you have in that school. I had a personal experience where I just, you know, background, a friend of mine that worked at public health and I went in to say, hey, you know, we were asked to come in and like talk to their GSA and stuff. And a teacher was saying in the conversation, we were talking about, so what does your curriculum say about that? And she literally said, oh, we don't use the curriculum. That's just for people who don't know what they're doing. Yeah, that happened.
Whoa.
So you know, there's such a broad variety of situations that are affecting real people.
Yes.
And you know, as our whole lives, as Melanie and I, just by the way, just a little reminder, I know we say this all the time, but just a little reminder, we are OWL. We are the national presence of OWL. So we don't have like a robust, you know, infrastructure for this. We count on y'all who have done the facilitating to do things like, you know, take some continuing ed or you know, do some anti-racism work so you can see how that intersects with what you're teaching with your kids. Particularly if you're in an all-white congregation, think about how you need to have those conversations around anti-racism and sexuality, particularly if. So I think that there's just so much, right? There's just so much. I don't know. I'm finding it hard to understand how somebody couldn't be humble about how much there is to know and learn.
Well, I think it helps that we use the circles of sexuality model, which Tanya's familiar with, because then you see that all of the topics that people need to learn about. It's not just the biology stuff. That's frankly the easy stuff. It's the relationships and the sexualization and the sensuality and the sexual identity, and all of that is so complex. And as we know, it keeps changing the understandings that we have of these concepts. I mean, think of the biology, you know, used to be XX or XY, and now we know that it's a continuum, right? And so it behooves us to continue learning. I I would like to maybe move into where people can find some of these opportunities. There are lots of professional conferences that people can attend that if they're members, but we know that most people that are listening are not full-time sexology professionals who would have access to those conferences. So let's start, because Tanya is a key player in the National Sex Ed Conference, and Amy and I have been presenters there over the past years as well. So let's talk a little about how that my experience might be for people who aren't professionals, that are our facilitators. What would you have to say about that, Tanya?
I think for the National Sex Ed, and I think that's possibly where we met before even Widener. For me, I was coming into that space of like, why are we always so fragmented? And I felt like I was home at that conference. I was like, whoo, I made it. I found my folks. Like, this is it. Because people came from such a range of disciplines or organizations. And I think if nothing else, that conference it's typically affordable, although, you know, Atlantic City is not easy to get to, y'all. But no offense, New Jersey.
Although
But,
it was online, it's partially online.
it was partially online. It was all online last year and partially online this year, which also made it highly more accessible. So I think lessons learned from COVID, if people weren't already doing online conferences, is to do that. So plug. But the reason I say that is that the range of topics, so it is specific for educators, is what I also like about that. And it doesn't matter what level of educator. Like, I saw someone in here say, you know what, I'm a sexuality educator to my own kids. Yes, it could be something that could benefit parents, guardians, trusted adults as well. So Melanie, somebody mentioned the circles of sexuality. I think that's another place where, like, you can learn more about how to apply. If you understand that concept, you can go to workshops and really finesse and reflect on how different topics impact the circles, or how you might teach the circles. If we were talking about racism, like, how does culture impact sexuality or sensuality, for lack of a better, like, if we think about how folks feel about our bodies, and I think about Black and brown girls in particular who might be sexualized just because of the way their bodies look, like, genetically they can't control that. That's a circle you can have a whole conversation about, which also, you know, they don't stand alone, they kind of overlap. So you can have other conversations about, like, how does how I feel about my body impact the type of sex that I have, or how I dress and my gender expression. So all of that I think it just really lends to good conversations. The S.L.A.M conference, Sexuality Liberators and Movers by Stephanie Zabata, is another online venue where, like, Stephanie puts it where it needs to be as it relates to calling out patriarchy, calling out racism, calling out ableism as it relates to sexuality education. And that was the first time at that conference we had a colleague, I think it's Dr. Natasha Ramsey, but I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that, but I can share it with you all later, who created some images of body parts and anatomy that were brown, like very specific, as it relates to sexuality education, having that available for people on Instagram and being a partner. So there are a lot of online opportunities as well as face-to-face opportunities.
You know, and one example of the way that this can enhance our work as our whole lives facilitators, I remember going to a fabulous workshop that was about consent, specifically focused on people who identify as males. And one slide they showed had a road, like a country road with a yellow line down it and a big boulder in the middle of the road. And they said, so, you know, consent lessons are often teaching the female identified people to put the boulder in the road so that this is the stopping point. You know, for a long time, there have been gatekeepers that are the people who are supposed to say no. And then culturally, people who identify as boys are taught, well, you're just supposed to keep moving forward,
right?
Inch that line forward, and don't listen if they say no. Just keep trying to get over that border, and if you can't get over the boulder, go around it. And so one of the things that we try to do in OWL is to say, no, just you see the boulder, that means stop.
Yes,
that means it's time for a conversation. That, you know, like, okay, so that's not acceptable, so where do we go from here? But just, being in that opportunity to see the way that we teach consent and see why we teach it that way, because there's all these cultural messages and societal messages coming out that are not what we're teaching in OWL. It just kind of gives you more strength and more confidence to teach the way we're teaching. So that can be a great opportunity as well. I would like to give a plug to amaze.org.
Oh, yeah.
And the online videos and resources there. That's a form of education. It's stuff that's designed for youth, but adults can learn for it.
And there's a parent portal too.
There's a parent portal. Advocatesforyouth.org has parent resources and educator resources as well. Answers.org, which is associated with Rutgers, has wonderful online courses. I remember before I got my education as a sex educator and I was doing Our Whole Lives, I would attend the answer workshops in person. And there was one that was called Is Oral Sex the New Third Base? And I just kind of went just to learn. I didn't know what I was going to learn. And it was one of the activities they did was they had us vote with our feet like we do in Our Whole Lives, stand over against that wall if you think that you can have oral sex and still be a virgin, or stand on that wall if you think that once you've had oral sex, you're no longer a virgin. And I was one of two people on the side to say, well, if you've had oral sex, I don't think that, virginity is such a weird concept anyway, but it's a level of intimacy where I was thinking of it as intimacy, that if you're that intimate with a person, then you have had your sexual debut. And this whole other room full of people who were mostly educators in schools said, oh no, virginity means penis and vagina. I'm like, and so what the people at Answers that leading the workshop did was actually facilitate a wonderful dialogue about what does virginity mean? What does it mean if the act is consensual or coercive? What is the role of intimacy? And this was long before I was a professional sex educator, but it expanded my knowledge so much to be in that room for that conversation. I was really grateful.
And I want to see too, like, I think as you're bringing that up, Melanie, because the vast majority of Our Whole Lives programs are facilitated in our faith communities. So I also want to bring up some of the resources that our faith communities have. And I know that if you have UUA, the UUA ones, Melanie, if you can pop those in the chat, UCC has a trans visibility toolkit, and non-binary, and then the Open and Affirming Coalition has a ton of resources about LGBTQ issues and topics, because that's one of the things I get the most questions about. Like, my church wants a conversation about this, or I'm doing a presentation about gender, or could you do a presentation about gender? Those kind of things. That's really a very kind of hot topic right now. So there are many resources that our denominations have as well for you around different topics that some people find it challenging to bring up in faith communities. And yet we interrupt. Tanya, go ahead, keep going. I put some things in the chat that you were talking about.
You were loading the chat. But the one other thing I was going to bring up, and I think we need more research to show the effectiveness. Like, I can give a personal testament to it. I don't know if anyone else can, but there is something called a sexual attitude reassessment, and they've been around for a very long time, and they've evolved in such a way. So it's not your typical cognitive, I'm gonna go to learn something so I can go do it, apply it, whatever. It's more so, I need to learn some stuff about me. I was actually listening, I think it was Brene Brown who the other night, and she was talking about, like, a lot of times our judgment comes from places of shame. Like, when we judge other people's behaviors or things about people, when we judge, period, it's usually from places of shame in our own selves. And when we start talking about sexuality, a lot of the things are because we've been socialized in the shame for a lot of different things. Even if we don't enjoy them, we don't understand them, there's this shame that comes along with it, and fear then starts to take over, and we're not open to even respecting what people do. So what I love about the SAR, the sexual attitude reassessment, is that the different topics you're exposed to videos. Some of them can be very explicit. I've done a SAR where I've had minimal explicit material, but it's really focused on race and sexuality. And there's one that Bianca Loreno has done specifically for folks who work with adolescents. So the sexual attitude reassessment is more about you. Like, you need to figure out why you feel the way you feel about certain things. You can talk about it in a safe space with a small group of individuals and do some reflection. And I know it helped me figure out, like, I had issues around minor attracted people and pedophiles. I'll personally say that, like, I didn't know where it came from until I participated in the SAR, and I was like, oh, poo. Now I know, where this came from, and I need to be able to teach. I need to be able to support people without my own stuff always coming out. But I also have to acknowledge that I have some stuff and how to navigate that. And that's what a SAR does.
I'm wondering, because we all had to do SARs as part of our our certification process, and also to just graduate from Widener. But I'm wondering how what the comfort level of somebody might be at a SAR that mostly is attended by people who are professionals, either predominantly therapists or people being professional sex educators.
Dr. Davis, Melanie. I did a SAR for our Teen Pregnancy Prevention Initiatives. That's what it's called here, TIPI, in North Carolina. I knew it couldn't be like a SAR that I went to. Like, I knew there were certain, I had to change the materials. And even then, so there's two challenges that occur that people have to be aware of. And the first one was what I said. It is not a training, skills building experience. It is not you're not going to get at cool activities and icebreakers that you're going to be able to take and do in your sessions. That's not happening. So it's not that cognitive, it's the affective. It's like, why do I feel that way? Why am I feeling grossed out? Like, acknowledging all the feelings that you have and talking about them and processing. The second is to realize that some people teach things and topics that they teach, but they really have no real connection or experience to, have never even watched or seen or heard a story. Like, I've had the SAR that I did for the Tippy group, we had people come in from different gender and sexuality identities. Some were trans identified, some were non-binary, some were intersex. And although it's like, I can teach about that because, this is what I'm talking about, it was not until they were face to face with someone, they were like, oh, you know what? I might be uncomfortable. Really, I'm not doing my best at this because I had no connection. I've never talked to anyone. I've never watched a video about living as someone who identifies as intersex or non-binary. And so it just changes the way you approach it. And so a person has to realize that the part that you said about being unshockable, go ahead and release that. The goal is to be shocked or to be
at a SAR. Yeah, we did one. The Sexuality and Aging Consortium hosted one on sexuality and aging, and it was interesting because people were challenged about their feelings about people being older and being sexually active. And with their attitudes about being sexually active if their bodies don't look or function the way younger bodies do. And so people adapted to that and explored that, and then all of a sudden the topic of sexuality and sexual behavior and dementia came up. Ooh. And that unleashed a whole lot of other feelings that people had about whether, that was moral and ethical and who's going to manage that and the whole thing. And so it really was a good opportunity for people not to look at things in a legalistic way, but in a, what do you want for yourself? Mm-hmm. If I start losing my cognition, does that mean I stop being a sexual being? Yeah. Does that mean I can't love somebody anymore because I have dementia? So it does afford a lot of opportunities for pondering these things.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, I had this professor in graduate school And we would ask, and it was social work, that's my graduate degree in social work. And we would ask these, but what if ABCJLKQTZ, and he would always say, well, it depends. To the point where when we graduated, we got him a t-shirt that said his name on the front and on the back. Well, it depends. And so I think that, it's not like, I'm not talking about situational ethics, but I am talking about like, it's complicated, right? Like you can't there's no one size fits all for lots and lots and lots of this stuff and these conversations, which is why dispositional humility is so important.
And it's why, in our whole lives, we don't ask people to put a stake in the ground about this is the right answer for everybody, right? Because the right answer isn't the same for everybody.
And we're not a preachy curriculum, right? Think about it. Think about this in terms of what your values are.
Yeah.
Think about what decision you might, here's some practice making some decisions in some tough scenarios so that you, when it comes to a point where you are actually in a situation that is high stakes, you will have thought about how you might respond to something similar.
And I think as you're doing this work, there's a level of commitment you have to make to yourself to remain a lifelong learner. So that you can grow. I'll just add this last quote from one of my research participants said that I think consistent professional development allows us, remember we're talking about humility, to humble ourselves in regards to not thinking we know it all and keeping us open to ideas outside of our own understanding. That's literally what we have to do. We have to make a commitment to do that. Whether it's through going to a conference, participating in a SAR. Like I tell everybody, one of my new quotes for when people ask certain things, I'm like, read a book. Like there are plenty of books to start with. If you have questions about reproductive justice, there are plenty of books out there. Racism, there's books about there. Oppression as it relates to sexuality. Read a book. Like that's your starting point. Just read a book.
Thank you. I mean, that's the fabulous way to wrap this up, Tanya. This has been so wonderful, and thank you for sharing your research with everybody. It's really helpful. Amy, would you like?
Yeah, let me just wrap up here. I want to say again, I want to thank you, Dr. Bass, for coming on today. We just really appreciate your time and your expertise and your approachability and all of your wisdom that you've shared with us today. I also want to let you know that our next webinar will be with Dorian, Solot, and Marshall Miller around their new book that Melanie has a copy of. I haven't gotten mine yet. And that is I Heart Orgasms. And so that'll be February 1st. And then we will send you, when you signed up for this webinar, if you checked that it was okay with you that the UCC send you occasional emails, then you'll get our follow-up email. If you didn't check that, then we don't spam you with that. So there will be a follow-up email that will come out either later this week or early next week. And I will capture all of the if Jennifer, you'll save the chat, then I'll capture all of the URLs and resources that were in there so that they will be in your follow-up email. If you did not check that and you don't get that email by the middle of next week, you can ping me and I would be happy to forward that email to you. Here, I'm putting my email in the chat right now. It's johnsona@ucc.org.
Or owl@ucc.
Or owl@ucc.org too gets to me as well.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month.
All right. Happy New Year.
Tanya, if you want to stay on for a minute.
Okay. Sorry, I hit my printer. You might hear that.
No problem. No,
I'm going to stop.
Wait till everybody.